Lay an Open Rose Garden, Chapter 5, an Adrienette Hanahaki alternate universe sequel series, Fanfiction. Knock knock. Without warning, Alia grabbed Nino's hand and ran them out of the hallway, and the sound of a door hitting the wall rang through Adrien's ears. People and more noises seemed to shuffle in, and it wasn't until they got close did Adrien realize that they were paramedics. Adrien stared down at the girl he was holding, scared to death of what was happening. The red-haired woman with pursed, worried lips appeared at the doorway. She directed the first responders to lift Marinette and put her on a stretcher. Adrien felt a blaze of innate protection and glared harshly at the first paramedic. His hold on Marinette tightened infinitesimally, and he held her close to his chest. "What are you doing?" he practically growled. "Don't touch her." The paramedic gave him a serious and slightly confused look. He held out his hands. "Sir, I need to transfer this patient to the ER," the first responder said. Adrien eyed him suspiciously. "Sir, I promise you this will be for her best chance of survival. I'm trained to help her survive. I understand you're worried. She will be in good hands." Begrudgingly, Adrien let his arms loosen around Marinette, and before she could even slip down to the ground, the paramedics caught her and strapped her to the gurney. Immediately, she got hooked up to all sorts of machines. There were some that he recognized and some that he didn't. The red-haired woman eyed him, Alia, and Nino. "You're Marinette's other friends, right?" she said with a slight, comforting smile on her face. Alia nodded as she motioned to Adrien and Nino, who kind of just stood there, unmoving. "It is good to finally meet you. However, this is not the situation I'd hoped for," the woman sighed. "I'm Dr. Tiki. I've been working with Marinette for quite some time now. I know this is all confusing, and I'm sure the two of you are very confused, but I promise I will explain it all later. We are going to take her to the hospital right now and then stabilize her. I'll explain then. Feel free to come. I'll tell the front desk your names." The woman hurried away to follow Marinette and the paramedics out the door. Alia let out a huge sob, falling onto Nino, who hugged her tight. He and Adrien exchanged a look of confusion and worry. Is Marinette dead?" Adrien asked. His voice was nearly a whisper. He really didn't like to think like this, but he had seen his mother in those hospital beds so many times. The image of her being lifted off of it was ingrained to his head. He didn't want that to happen. He didn't want to lose Marinette. Not now, probably not ever, but especially not now. He had just become friends with her less than a year ago. She had practically changed his whole life. "No," Alia hiccuped and drank a glass of water. She let out a low, shaky breath. "Not yet." Her tone sounded ominous, and Adrien looked out the door, praying to any deities out there that Marinette would be okay, and he would get to see her again, alive and well. "Let's go," he said. Somehow his voice was even. Alia and Nino looked at each other and then nodded at him. He snatched his house keys from the counter, and together they all left the apartment and headed out onto the subway. "Yes, please come." Alia rushed on the phone. She had called Marinette's parents. Adrien could hear the worry even from so far away. He had never met her parents, though they seemed like lovely people, and he was honestly quite sad that this was how he was going to meet them. Adrien had always hoped he'd meet them over the summer or on a holiday break, and they would ask him questions as Marinette shows him her childhood home. He didn't really think that was going to happen anymore. "Of course. She is very strong. Please text me when you get here. Alright, goodbye." Alia sighed when she got off the phone, and Nino wiped at her eyes with his shirt sleeve. Do you want water? Nino asked gently. Alia shook her head. No, I'm good, she said, a lot calmer than she was before. Do Panchang's on their way? Nino asked. She nodded. Adrien took in a breath and flickered his eyes towards the door entrance. They were waiting for Dr. Tiki to come back and call them in. His leg was thumping impatiently on the ground. Adrien was not a nervous person. Even though he had changed his shirt, he could still see those reddish stains on the clean fabric. Alia, Adrien, Nino, you may come with me. Adrien shot up like a torpedo when the doctor beckoned for them to follow her. He followed her anxiously, hoping that the news would be good and that Marinette would be stable. He honestly felt like he had had a lifetime's worth of hospital bad news already. How is she? Alia questioned, clinging onto Nino's arm. Dr. Tiki looked up and smiled slightly, probably to make them feel a little bit better at least. She's stabilized right now, sleeping, but I reckon she'll wake soon. Her body and her mind are exhausted. She's fighting hard, the red-haired woman said. Adrien let out a breath of relief. At least Marinette was objectively okay. She was stable and probably would be awake soon, and he could finally blubber to her about how much he missed her. Adrien? He was shocked out of his daze when he heard his name being called. May I speak to you? In the hallway? Her voice sounded ominous, and Adrien gulped. Without a word, he followed her out the door and noticed Alia's small, worried look. In the hall, the air felt thinner somehow. Adrien looked at the doctor curiously. Adrien, I know you are worried about your friend, she said, and I feel that you should know her condition. I do ask you keep it more confidential because it is a very, very rare disease. You, however, well, I believe you do have the right to know what is going on. Adrien frowned. What did Marinette have? I mean, at least he was getting an answer, but it was quite a worrying one. Marinette has a disease called Hanahaki's disease. It is a condition where flowers begin to grow and sprout and build up in a person's lungs. Adrien gasped and covered his mouth. What? Flowers? In a person's Marinette's lungs? How on earth is that possible? Wait, what? That's how... Flowers? Adrien said with wide eyes. The doctor gave him a small comforting smile. Yes, flowers. It is a very rare occurrence, but it happens. Unfortunately, it's a very myelogenic disease. She frowned, and Adrien felt the air escape his lungs very suddenly. No! He cried out, catching the attention of several of the nurses and doctors around him. Sorry, he said, sheepishly looking around. Tiki smiled at him sympathetically. I know this is a lot to take in, but the important part is that the disease comes from harboring an unrequited love, she said. Adrien's brain stuttered. An unrequited love? Who was Marinette in love with? And who on earth wouldn't like her back? Marinette was the kindest soul on earth. She was caring and sweet, and had a very pretty laugh. He couldn't imagine how a person could fall for her back. Did she still like Luca? Probably not. She seemed pretty happy about them ending things amicably. Was there someone new? Adrien didn't know how he felt about a new boy in Marinette's life, strangely enough. It's you, Adrien. What on earth? Me? What? Adrien's brain couldn't process the words fast enough. Dr. Tiki opened her mouth to explain when a nurse's head popped out from inside Marinette's room. Dr. Tiki, the patient has woken up. Dr. Tiki nodded and thanked the nurse, beckoning for Adrien to follow her in. His head was spinning, his mind was lost, and he was reeling from this new information.